She thought it was just a pile of snow. Cold, still, lifeless. But when it moved and cried, her heart stopped. Buried beneath layers of ice and silence was a 2-month-old golden retriever puppy, shaking, soaked, and nearly frozen to death. Who would do something so cruel, and why? What she uncovered next would unravel a secret that shocked an entire town, and gave a nameless puppy a second chance at life. The sky hung heavy over Mountain Hollow. Its dim morning light filtered through a thick veil of ash-colored clouds. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silent wasteland of snowdrifts and frozen breath. The narrow roads that twisted through the sleepy town were still blanketed with last night's blizzard, unplowed and nearly deserted, except for the soft crunch of boots belonging to Valerie Green. The air stung her face, each breath like glass shards in her throat. She wore a thick brown parka, the hood trimmed with faux fur, her gloved hands shoved deep in her pockets, head bowed beneath a gray knitted cap as she walked with slow, absent-minded steps toward nowhere in particular. Valerie, 36, had once been a bright-eyed art teacher in Denver. She stood at 5'7", slender with soft curves, her skin pale from both the cold and weeks spent mostly indoors. Her dark auburn hair was tucked into her cap, but several curls had escaped, brushing against her wind-chapped cheeks. Her face bore the quiet stillness of someone who no longer expected life to surprise her. Deep green eyes dimmed by a fog of exhaustion, lips rarely curved into anything more than a faint line. After a depressive breakdown following a traumatic incident at her old school, she'd resigned and retreated to the small mountain town to live with her older sister, hoping time and distance would offer peace. It hadn't. This morning's walk wasn't a ritual, it was a desperation, a silent attempt to feel something beyond the suffocating numbness. She had wandered along the outer edge of a service road, where plows hadn't yet reached and the snow was piled in uneven mounds. She paused by a crooked stop sign, leaning slightly under the weight of the storm. That's when she saw it. Just ahead, near the gutter beside a broken picket fence, was a small mound of snow that seemed off. It wasn't shaped like the others, and it shuddered. Not by wind. There was no wind. Valerie squinted, stepping closer. A pulse of movement again. She knelt down cautiously, brushing the powder away with her gloved hands. What emerged made her gasp. A tiny golden face, tangled with wet fur and shards of ice, lay buried beneath the snow. It was a puppy, no more than 2 months old, clearly a golden retriever, though its soaked coat clung so tightly to its bones that its breed was almost indistinct. The puppy's head was cocked unnaturally, as if it had been dropped or thrown. One paw curled beneath its belly, the other extended stiffly outward. Ice crusted around its muzzle and ears, and its eyes were shut tight, as though dreaming of something better. For a moment, Valerie thought it was dead. Her breath caught. She looked around. The road was empty, not even a bird or distant car. "Oh, God," she whispered, reaching out. She hesitated. Was it too late? She touched its flank. Cold. Stone cold. But then, there, so faint she nearly missed it, a tremor beneath her fingers, a shallow, broken whimper barely louder than the falling snow. Valerie's instincts kicked in. She tore off her coat and bundled the puppy against her chest, cradling it tightly as she stood. Her pulse raced. She turned back the way she came, almost tripping over her boots as she half ran through the slush. The nearest clinic was only 3 blocks away, near the old post office. She didn't stop to think. She didn't even cry. The clinic was small, a converted 1-story house with a hand-painted sign that read, "Mountain Hollow Animal Care." Valerie burst through the front door, the bell overhead jingling sharply. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wall. A woman in her 50s, wearing thick-rimmed glasses and a pale blue scrub top, looked up from behind the front desk. "I found this puppy," Valerie said breathlessly, pushing back her hood. "He's freezing. He's not moving. I think he's dying." The receptionist, whose name tag read Lois, frowned with professional distance. Her sandy gray hair was pinned back in a messy bun, her face weary with years of protocol and responsibility. She glanced at the bundle in Valerie's arms and shook her head. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Valerie replied, incredulous. "He was in the snow. Someone dumped him. He's not breathing right. Please." Lois stood, gently holding up a hand. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're not accepting walk-ins today. Dr. Bennett is out due to the storm, and we're not an emergency clinic. Valerie's face flushed. Are you serious? Look at him. He's going to die. Lois didn't move. I understand you're upset, but we're not equipped right now. There's a county animal hospital 20 minutes down in Pine Grove. They have the resources. 20 minutes? He won't make it 20 minutes, Valerie snapped, then caught herself. Her voice cracked. Please just let me use a heating pad or something. Lois's eyes flicked down to the puppy, then back up. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Her silence was answer enough. Valerie turned and left without another word. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, fine and quiet. She walked quickly, clutching the puppy tighter, whispering to it in a voice she hadn't used since childhood. Hold on, just hold on. Back at her sister's house, a modest brick home with a porch half buried in snow, Valerie kicked open the door with her boot. No one was home. She rushed into the bathroom, turning the faucet to warm and filling the sink halfway. She laid towels along the floor, grabbed every blanket she could find, and set the puppy down beside the sink. His tiny chest moved, but barely. Come on, Oliver, she whispered, the name tumbling out before she realized she'd chosen one. She soaked a cloth in warm water and began to gently rub the ice from his fur. His ears twitched faintly, a single paw jerking once. His nose, once gray, was slowly turning pink again. A wince of hope fluttered in her chest. She worked silently for nearly an hour, rotating hot water bottles, whispering reassurances to him like prayers. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from fear. She didn't know what she was doing. But it didn't matter, she was all he had. And maybe in that moment, he was all she had too. Outside, the snowfall softened. Light returned to the edge of the sky, diffused through the clouds. In that dim glow, Valerie sat with a nameless puppy who now had a name, wrapped in the smallest, quietest miracle she had ever held. The fire in the wood stove crackled faintly as Valerie sat on the floor, wrapped in a thick quilt, her legs folded beneath her, and her back pressed against the kitchen cabinet. The house was dim, except for the flickering orange light that danced across the walls. Oliver lay bundled in a wool blanket atop a cushion beside her, a faint twitch occasionally rippling through his hind leg. His breathing had steadied, but remained shallow, and his body remained limp, his tiny frame no longer shivering, an unsettling stillness that made her heart twist every time she looked over. It had been nearly 6 hours since she'd found him beneath the snow. He hadn't moved once. In those long hours, Valerie had taken a single photo. Just one. Not for attention, not even for documentation. It was impulse. She'd snapped the image when she was still kneeling in the street, the moment she had pulled him from the snow, her hands raw and red from the cold. Oliver's body curled in her coat, his nose covered in frost. Her face had been soaked with tears. She didn't plan to post it, but when she saw him slipping deeper into stillness, fear driving her into helpless circles, she opened her phone, uploaded the photo, and wrote, I don't know what else to do. Please, if anyone knows how to help him. The post spread faster than she expected. By midday, the image had been reshared hundreds of times. But instead of offers of help, the comments flooded in with suspicion, even hostility. This reeks of a hoax. She probably put the dog there herself. Anything for likes, I guess. Disgusting. Then someone dug up an old blog post from 2 years ago. An emotional essay Valerie had once written during her lowest point, confessing her struggle with anxiety and her hospitalization after a breakdown. The link was shared over and over, accompanied by captions like, Don't believe everything you see. This woman has a history. Valerie stared at her screen in disbelief, her face pale and jaw clenched, as comment after comment dissected her motives, her mental health, and her integrity. Her hands began to shake again, not from the cold, but from the weight of strangers' words. That night, snow began to fall again. Valerie shut off the Wi-Fi, dimmed the lights, and returned to the floor beside Oliver. The house was silent except for the wind tapping on the window panes. Her sister was still out of town, attending a conference in Seattle, and wouldn't be back for days. Valerie was alone, completely, and the air felt thick with judgment that had followed her even into this remote corner of the mountains. Around midnight, just as she was drifting into an exhausted sleep, Oliver moved. It was small, a soft sound, a wet rasp that might have been a whimper or just air catching in his lungs. Then, unmistakably, a weak cry, sharp and broken, like a sob trying to form. Valerie jolted upright, leaning over him. "Oliver," she whispered, voice trembling. He didn't open his eyes, but his paw twitched again, his nose flared slightly, and a new rhythm took shape in his chest. Still faint, still fragile, but life. Tears filled her eyes again, and this time she didn't hold them back. "You're still here," she whispered. "You little fighter." That was the moment she truly named him, not just a desperate choice in the heat of panic, but with intention. Oliver. Because there was something impossibly pure about the name. It sounded like hope, like something small and gentle and worth saving. She whispered it again as she wrapped him in another towel fresh from the dryer, pressing him close to her chest. "You're going to stay with me. We're going to get through this." The next morning, the sun returned to Mountain Hollow, casting golden light across the snowbanks. The town sparkled like it had been dusted in diamonds. Valerie rose early, having slept only in brief intervals, and went out to fetch more firewood from the back shed. As she stepped onto the porch, she nearly collided with a man crouched beside the fence line. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a heavy parka that hung open to reveal a red plaid flannel beneath. His face was angular, rough-hewn, with a sharp jawline and deep-set hazel eyes. His nose was slightly crooked, and his skin had a rugged, wind-burned hue. He looked about 45, though there was something in the weary slant of his posture that made him seem older. His beard was short but thick, a mix of brown and gray, and his hands were calloused. He stood slowly as she approached, brushing snow off his jeans. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, his voice low, tinged with a southern drawl. "Your neighbor told me someone here found a dog. Figured I'd see if I could help." Valerie hesitated. "Who are you?" "Tom Bristow," he said, extending a gloved hand. "Used to be a vet, retired a couple years back. I live up on Granger Road. Word travels fast in a small town." Tom had once been a well-regarded veterinarian in Denver before a tragic incident involving a misdiagnosed dog led to a lawsuit that cost him his practice. Since then, he had retreated to the mountains, taking odd jobs and largely keeping to himself. The town knew of him, respected him even, but no one really knew him. He was a man who'd been broken by guilt and preferred silence to sympathy. Valerie nodded slowly. "He's inside. He's not doing great." Tom followed her into the house. When he saw Oliver, he went completely still. He knelt beside the makeshift bed and gently peeled back the towel. His eyes scanned the puppy's frame, pausing at the ribs that showed through the skin, the frostburn on his ears, the bruising near the neck. He didn't speak for a long time. "This dog didn't just get lost," he said finally, his tone flat. "He was dumped. Maybe worse." Valerie sank into a chair. "I figured." Tom looked up at her, eyes narrowing slightly. "You post that picture yesterday?" She hesitated. "Yes, just one. I didn't think it would turn into all this." He nodded as if he'd expected that. "People don't like what they can't understand, especially when it looks like pain." "Do you think he'll make it?" Tom was quiet again, resting a hand on Oliver's side, feeling the faint beat of life beneath his fingers. Too early to say, but the fact that he's still breathing after a night like that means something. Valerie watched him carefully, unsure what to make of this gruff, quiet man who had appeared out of nowhere. There was something guarded in him, but not cruel. Just someone who had learned the hard way that kindness sometimes cost more than people were willing to pay. Tom stood and pulled a small satchel from his coat. "I'll come by again tomorrow. Bring some antibiotics. He needs fluids, but not too much at once. Keep him warm. No loud noises." Valerie nodded. "Thank you." He paused at the door. "Don't read the comments. They don't know the truth, but you do." Then he was gone. Valerie sat back down beside Oliver, gently stroking his fur. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely alone. Tom returned the next morning as promised, arriving just after sunrise. The snow had hardened overnight into a brittle crust, and his boots crunched loudly on the frost-covered steps of Valerie's porch. He knocked once, and before she could answer, the door creaked open. She was already there, pale and bleary-eyed, wrapped in a faded navy bathrobe over layers of knit sweaters. Her hair was in disarray, and dark circles clung stubbornly beneath her eyes. "You're early," she said, voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "You're up," Tom replied, stepping inside without waiting for further invitation. "That's what matters." Inside the house, the warmth from the wood stove lingered in the air, heavy with the scent of wet fur and chamomile tea. Oliver lay where he had been all night, nestled in his nest of towels near the hearth. His breathing was more rhythmic now, though shallow, and his limbs no longer stiff with cold. Tom knelt beside him, unzipping the duffel bag he'd brought. Inside were supplies, gauze, antiseptics, syringes, and a stethoscope dulled by years of disuse. Tom gently pulled the blanket away and examined the puppy in silence. Valerie hovered nearby, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "He made 2 noises last night," she said quietly, like a gasp, then a little cry. "He tried to lift his head, but it fell back down." Tom nodded, eyes focused. "Good sign, means his nervous system isn't completely shut down." As he began to work, carefully checking Oliver's joints and temperature, Valerie noticed his expression harden. He brushed aside tufts of fur around the pup's neck and frowned. "What is it?" she asked, leaning in. Tom said nothing at first. He tilted Oliver's head gently, revealing faint dark bruises hidden under the fluff of gold. Bruising, consistent with blunt pressure. He moved lower and traced a finger along the pup's upper chest. "Here, scar tissue and a thin laceration. Maybe rope. Could have been restrained." He shifted to Oliver's paws. The pads were cracked, and 2 nails were worn down almost to the quick. "Looks like he tried to dig. Hard. And not in snow. This is friction from something abrasive. Maybe wire mesh." Valerie covered her mouth. "Oh my God! Someone kept him in a cage?" Tom nodded grimly. "Longer than a day. Long enough to hurt." Valerie sat back, her face a canvas of horror and disbelief. "Who would do that to something so small?" Tom didn't answer, but his hand slowed as he examined the last wound. An inflamed line along Oliver's side. His jaw tightened, and for a moment he sat still, lost in a memory. Then Oliver stirred. A soft rattle escaped his throat, and he turned his head slightly, his eyes still shut, his nose twitching toward Tom's hand. A small, tentative tongue flicked out, brushing Tom's knuckle. The man froze. Years ago, he'd had a dog. Gus. A mutt with half a tail and eyes that glowed like honey in the sun. Gus had licked Tom's fingers the exact same way the night he died, after Tom had misread his symptoms and made the wrong call. He'd bled out before the anesthetic could even take hold. That was the night Tom stopped being a vet. That was the night his hands started trembling any time they touched fur. Now, this half-dead creature was licking him like forgiveness. Tom blinked twice and cleared his throat. "He's got a shot. If he makes it through tonight, his chances go up. But he'll need more help. Stronger antibiotics. IV fluids." "I'll drive," Valerie said instantly. "Pine Grove Animal Hospital is open on weekends. They have everything." Tom shook his head. "They won't treat him without proof of ownership or surrender papers. And if you surrender him, they might not fight to keep him alive." Valerie gritted her teeth. "So what do we do?" "I'll handle it," Tom replied. "I'll make a call to an old friend. Runs a supply co-op for independent rescuers. I'll need your help administering the fluids at night." "You really think he'll make it?" Tom looked down at Oliver, who had nestled his head against the towel, ears twitching faintly. "I think if he's made it this far, someone wants him to." Later that afternoon, as Valerie sat by the window sipping tea and staring out across the snowy yard, she saw movement at the edge of the street. A figure, male, tall, wearing a black wool coat and a beanie, was standing by the tree line, scanning the road slowly, almost methodically. He took a few steps forward, then turned and walked back the way he came, head bowed, hands in pockets. He didn't knock. He didn't look at the house. But something about his presence made her spine tense. She watched him disappear between the frost-covered pines before letting the curtain fall back into place. A moment later, she heard Tom's voice from the other room. "Someone's been asking around town." Valerie turned. "What?" "I heard it this morning at the gas station," Tom said, stepping into the room with a mug in hand. "Stranger came through asking if anyone had seen a golden retriever puppy. Said it was his." Her heart froze. "Did he describe Oliver?" Tom nodded once. "Said it had a scar on its neck. Said it ran off during a camping trip. Seemed too specific." Valerie gripped the edge of the counter. What did you tell him? I didn't talk to him, but Jake from the station did. Said the man didn't leave a name, just a number no one could reach. Valerie felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the snow. The snowfall had eased into a lazy drift by late morning, the sun casting weak, golden rays through the gray overcast above Mountain Hollow. Valerie sat on the living room floor beside Oliver's makeshift bed, gently stroking the fur along his back. He was still thin and weak, but his eyes had finally opened, soft, dark brown, and full of an exhausted curiosity. He couldn't yet lift his head without help, but when he saw Valerie, he let out a low, breathy sound and moved his paw an inch toward her hand. She smiled for the first time in days. Later that afternoon, she decided to wash the torn fabric that had been wrapped around Oliver when she first found him. It had been hastily tossed into a bag and forgotten in the corner. The plastic was brittle and half frozen, the outer layers stiff with dried mud and salt. As she pulled it apart, something small clinked against the floor. It was a charred piece of metal, roughly the size of a dog tag, blackened around the edges, with a frayed string still knotted through the corner. Valerie picked it up carefully, turning it in her hand. Beneath the soot, she could just make out a string of characters stamped into the metal. Most had been melted or scratched off, but a few were still visible. #04, R7A, 0. Her heart stilled. #04. The number felt like a whisper from the past, a clue. She pulled out her phone and called Tom. 20 minutes later, he was standing in her kitchen, his brow furrowed, turning the tag over in the light. That's not a pet collar, he muttered. No name, no contact. And that's not even a manufacturer code. That's classification. Valerie leaned against the counter, arms crossed. What kind of classification? Tom's lips pressed into a line. In my time working with emergency rescues, we once intercepted a shipment of lab dogs. Animals bred in secret for illegal testing, behavioral manipulation, stuff that would make your stomach turn. They were usually tagged by number and trial batch. It always started with the dog's number. Yours says 4. So, he was bred to be, what, tested on? Or worse. Tom's voice darkened. Some breeders experiment with controlled aggression, pain response, even dependency. And not just for labs. There are underground circuits that sell dogs bred for control, obedience, silence, places that don't care if they live. Valerie's knees went weak and she lowered herself into a chair. He's just a baby. Tom nodded. Which makes it worse. If he escaped, someone might be looking for him, not out of love, but to cover their tracks. A long silence followed. Then Valerie looked up. I've heard stories. There was a rumor about a place just outside town, an old livestock farm on Cedar Hollow Road, burned out in a fire about a year ago, but nobody ever really knew what went on there. There were complaints, smells, noise, but it was always brushed off. Tom crossed his arms. No one ever searched it? Not officially. It was private land. Owners vanished. He considered for a moment. We go tonight. Tonight? Valerie blinked. We don't have a warrant. We could get in trouble. No one owns it anymore. If something's happening there, we need proof. That night, the wind picked up again, rattling the eaves of Valerie's house. She bundled Oliver with a warm blanket and left a note for her sister, just in case. Tom arrived just after 10 p.m., wearing a heavy coat with a flashlight clipped to the collar and a steel thermos clutched in one gloved hand. Valerie had never seen him look more focused. His beard was freshly trimmed, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his worn-out beanie. You sure about this? He asked. No, she admitted, but I'm going anyway. The drive to Cedar Hollow Road was slow, the tires crunching over gravel and ice. The old farm stood behind a thicket of pine trees, barely visible in the dark. The barn had partially collapsed on one side, the main house boarded up with rotting planks. A rusted sign hung crooked on the gate. Private property, keep out. It was barely legible. They parked 100 yards back and walked in silence, their breath fogging in the cold. The moment they stepped through the gate, Tom paused. Do you hear that? Valerie stopped. A faint metallic creak echoed in the distance, then another. It wasn't wind. It was rhythmic. They moved forward, cutting through the side field. Behind the barn, a line of fresh tire tracks carved through the snow, leading to a loading dock that still had wheel ruts frozen into the mud. Tom knelt and placed his hand over one of the impressions. This is recent, within the last 2 days. Valerie's flashlight swept across the broken boards of the barn wall. Someone's been here. Suddenly the sound returned, this time louder. Wood scraping, chains, then headlights. Dim, but growing. They ducked behind a stack of discarded crates just as a large flatbed truck pulled into view. It was old, white, and mud-splattered, its rear bed covered with a brown tarp tied down with rope. 2 figures stepped out of the cab, one tall and thin, the other stockier with a heavy limp. Both wore balaclavas. They moved with haste and precision, lifting wooden crates from inside the barn and sliding them into the back of the truck. One of the men paused to light a cigarette. The flame briefly illuminated his face, sharp nose, thin lips, a scar running from cheekbone to jaw. Valerie recognized him immediately. It was the same man she'd seen near her street 2 days ago. She gripped Tom's arm. "That's him! He was watching the house!" Tom's face darkened, but he motioned for her to stay low. "We can't confront them, not yet." They watched as the final crate was loaded, the tailgate slammed shut, and the truck rolled back out into the night, disappearing down the hill without a trace. Tom stood slowly, pulling out his phone and snapping pictures of the remaining footprints and drag marks. "We need to call someone," Valerie whispered. "Not yet," Tom said. "If this is what I think it is, they've got people on the inside. We need to be smart." They stared into the darkness where the truck had vanished, hearts pounding with the weight of discovery. The air in Mountain Hollow turned brittle as February crept in, the kind of cold that felt sharp enough to cut skin. Valerie stared at the frost gathering on the kitchen window, her fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Tom sat across from her, both of them silent, as the weight of last night's discovery pressed between them like fog. The images he had captured, the crates, the men, the truck, were chilling, but blurry, distant, easy to dispute. Still, they had agreed. It was time to speak up. That morning, they went to the Mountain Hollow Sheriff's Department. The office was modest, tucked into a gray brick building behind the town library. Inside, a receptionist with shoulder-length blonde hair and a skeptical expression took their names and led them to Deputy Wade Carlson. Deputy Carlson was a man in his early 50s, with thinning, sandy-brown hair, a square jaw covered in grizzled stubble, and eyes that darted more than they listened. His uniform was pressed, his badge polished, but there was a tired slump to his shoulders that suggested a man used to ignoring more than acting. He motioned for them to sit as he closed a folder labeled Noise Complaints, Snowplow Routes. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning back with a sigh. "You think someone's running a, what, illegal dog lab from a burned-out farm that's been empty for a year?" Tom folded his arms, face stone set. "I know what I saw, and I know what those crates are used for. And I have the photos," Valerie added, pulling out a USB stick from her pocket, "and a dog with physical evidence all over his body." Carlson took the drive, but didn't plug it in. Instead, he leaned forward, fingers steepled. "I'm not saying you're lying, but you're talking about a serious accusation with no concrete IDs, no license plates, no witness other than yourselves, and a pup that, far as I know, could have come from anywhere." Valerie's voice rose. "You're saying because I'm not someone important, you won't even look. I'm saying we've had folks like you before, storm chasers, conspiracy theorists, people who see patterns in shadows." His eyes flicked to Tom. "And with all due respect, Doc Bristow, you're not exactly a trusted source anymore." The words hit like ice water. Tom's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. Carlson stood. "If you find hard evidence, a license plate, a name, something undeniable, we'll investigate. Until then, my hands are tied." Outside, the wind howled down Main Street. Tom and Valerie walked back to the truck in silence. Valerie's face was flushed, her hands shaking with anger. "They don't care." "They never do," Tom muttered. That afternoon, Tom returned to his cabin, nestled deep in the woods beyond the eastern ridge. It was small but solid, built decades ago, with thick cedar beams and a stone chimney. He spent the day mounting motion-detecting trail cameras, 2 at the front drive, one overlooking the ridge, another near the tree line that backed onto the old logging path. By nightfall, the property was ringed in silent eyes. Meanwhile, back at Valerie's, Oliver was finally showing signs of true recovery. He had begun standing on wobbly legs, attempting short steps that often ended in stumbles, but his spirit was evident. He would wag his tail when Valerie entered the room and sometimes press his nose into her palm with surprising urgency. Still, any loud sound, a dropped mug, a door creaking open too quickly, would send him scrambling under furniture, trembling. That night, Valerie awoke to a strange noise, a distant hum, then the crunch of tires. She stepped into the hallway, heart pounding. But by the time she reached the window, the sound was gone. Oliver was nowhere in sight. She found him in the kitchen, wedged into the narrow space beneath the cabinet hutch, his body pressed tight to the wall, eyes wide and wild. He was snarling softly, not at her, but at something beyond the room. Valerie dropped to her knees. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's just me." It took 10 minutes to coax him out. Once she had him wrapped in a towel and pressed against her chest, her hand slipped beneath the folded blanket he'd been sleeping in. There, caught between the inner lining, was a small piece of folded paper, worn, creased, stained with moisture. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was neat, mechanical. A list of 7 identifiers: 1 R7A091, 2 R7A092, 3 R7A093, 4 R7A094, 5 R7A095, 6 R7A096, 7 R7A097, status deceased. Below that, a line in different ink, pure blood control batch, 6 still viable. Valerie stared at the number 4. Her hands trembled. Oliver wasn't just one of many. He was number 4, a controlled trial, and the 7th was already gone. She took photos and sent them to Tom. The next morning, as Valerie debated whether to go public with this new evidence, her phone buzzed with a message request on social media. The profile image was a black and white photo of a young woman with dark curls and wide eyes. Claire Mendez. Claire, 29, was an investigative digital journalist known for diving into forgotten stories. With long, dark hair often braided over one shoulder, tan skin freckled from fieldwork, and an energetic gait, she carried a look of someone constantly balancing exhaustion and fire. Her articles had exposed unlicensed breeders, shady shelters, even a pet cremation scam. She had grown up in foster care, never allowed to keep pets, and now fought tooth and nail to protect animals that couldn't speak for themselves. Her message was short. "Saw your post, saw the hate, saw the eyes in that puppy. I'm coming to Mountain Hollow. I want the truth." The wind whistled through the bare branches above as Claire Mendez adjusted the lens of her DSLR camera, her breath puffing visibly in the morning chill. Dressed in a thick parka, with her hair tied in a braid beneath a gray wool beanie, she knelt in the snow, inspecting a set of faint tire tracks barely visible beneath last night's dusting of flurries. The pine needles around her crunched faintly beneath her boots. Her dark eyes, sharp and unblinking, scanned every inch of the disturbed ground, as if searching for the rhythm of a crime that had been buried too long. Valerie stood a few steps behind her, bundled tightly in a long, padded coat with a scarf wound high around her neck. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her eyes flicked between the tracks and the woods beyond with a growing sense of unease. "Are you sure we're in the right place?" Claire didn't look up. "Tom said the tracks led here. They're not logging trucks. Wheel spacing's wrong, too narrow." Tom, who stood a little further uphill with a pair of gloves tucked into the belt of his heavy canvas jacket, nodded toward the tree line. "That ridge there, it's old pasture land. No one's used it in years." Claire rose and brushed the snow from her knees. "Then it's perfect for hiding something." The 3 of them moved carefully through the thinning trees, the snow growing deeper with each step. Oliver had stayed behind, curled up by the fire at Tom's cabin. His progress had improved since the night he'd panicked under the counter, but Valerie knew better than to subject him to the cold and memory-soaked scent of this place. As they reached the clearing, the atmosphere seemed to change, quieter, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. Claire crouched again, this time over a patch of snow that had sunken in an unnatural square. She tapped it with the end of her boot. A dull thud responded. Tom stepped forward and kicked gently at the edge. Snow and ice cracked away, revealing the rusted bars of a metal crate buried beneath the surface. Valerie gasped. Claire immediately pulled out her camera and began filming. Together, they uncovered 3 crates. The first was empty, save for a torn scrap of tarp. The second held nothing but a broken ceramic bowl and frozen feces. The third, half filled with packed snow and leaves, contained a small, still body. A puppy, no older than Oliver had been when found. Its golden fur was matted with blood near the snout, its eyes closed, frozen in a final expression of panic. Valerie turned away, covering her mouth. Tom knelt beside the crate, face grim. They were keeping them out here, when they didn't need them anymore. Claire didn't stop recording. Her voice was low, controlled. We need to get this out. Now. That afternoon, the video went live. Claire's edited footage opened with a wide shot of the snowy forest, followed by sharp cuts of the crates, the dead puppy, and the details of the burned tag Valerie had found. Her voiceover, calm and unsparing, explained what they had uncovered: the mysterious numbered tag, the evidence of abuse, the eerie silence of local law enforcement. She ended with a single question: how many more are still out there? Within hours, the video exploded. Claire's following of 50,000 swelled to 80 in a night. The hashtags #justice, #furoliver, and #snowcagedogs began trending on multiple platforms. Comments poured in: outrage, grief, support, and shock. Tom, despite his reluctance toward public attention, agreed to appear in a follow-up video, showing Oliver's wounds and offering professional insight into the physical trauma. The footage of Oliver limping through the kitchen with bandages around one leg broke hearts everywhere. Valerie watched it all with a mix of anxiety and vindication. For so long, she had felt invisible, dismissed, judged by her past. Now, the truth was on fire, and people were listening. That evening, Deputy Carlson returned, not to apologize, but to act. Valerie answered the door to find him standing stiffly on the porch, hat in hand. "We've been ordered to open an investigation," he said, his voice clipped. "Too much attention. Higher-ups don't like what they're seeing online." Tom appeared beside her. "You're welcome." Carlson didn't smile. "Don't think this means you were right. It just means now I have to act like it." They didn't invite him in. 2 days later, Claire was reviewing surveillance footage from Tom's cabin. One of the trail cams had picked up movement during the previous week, a figure in a dark coat walking just beyond the eastern ridge. Claire zoomed in, enhancing the frame. The face was grainy but clear enough. The man's angular features and thin scar from cheekbone to jawline were unmistakable. She pulled up a file from her private archive, a list she'd compiled during a past investigation into illegal breeders across the Northwest. There he was, Marcus Wren, 42, former co-owner of an unlicensed kennel shut down in Idaho. Arrested once, vanished after charges were dropped due to lack of material evidence. Last seen in Washington state, suspected of involvement in cross-border dog trafficking. Claire leaned back in the chair, fingers steepled under her chin. "So that's who's been watching." She texted Tom and Valerie the frame with the caption, "He's not just a creep, he's wanted." The snow that had blanketed Mountain Hollow for weeks finally began to thaw, its icy grip retreating into slush and trickling water that wove through gutters and ditches like veins. Sunlight filtered through the windows of Valerie's home in quiet golden beams, warming the hardwood floors and casting soft shadows on the walls. In the living room, a small figure stood still, gazing into a mirror. Oliver had grown stronger with each passing day. His fur, once patchy and tangled, had begun to fluff back into its natural golden softness. The dullness in his eyes was replaced by something gentle and curious, though the ghosts of his past lingered in every startled twitch and flinch at sudden noises. He was still hesitant, especially when hearing a distant engine or a door slam too loudly, but there was light in him now, a cautious hope that glowed behind every glance toward Valerie. That morning she found him standing before the full-length mirror tucked beside the hallway coat rack. His small body was tense, ears perked forward, tail held low, but not tucked. He tilted his head, eyes scanning his own reflection, unsure of what he was seeing. Valerie knelt beside him, smiling faintly. "You don't recognize that boy, do you?" she whispered, brushing her fingers across his back. He didn't startle, just leaned into the touch. "That's you, Ollie. You're not a number anymore. You're not someone's experiment. You're Oliver, my boy." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and she rested her forehead gently against his head. He licked her cheek in response, a small, instinctive gesture that felt like an oath. The next few days were a blur of change. Thanks to Claire's viral coverage and the mounting public pressure, authorities from both the state and federal level descended on Mountain Hollow. A joint task force coordinated with local police to investigate the illegal breeding network suspected to stretch across multiple counties. The primary target, Marcus Wren. Valerie received the call late one night from Claire, whose voice trembled with exhilaration. "They've got them," she said. "A sting operation. They tried moving the remaining dogs to a new location in Idaho. They caught the truck at a way station, every dog alive, 23 of them, some in rough shape, but they're safe." Tom, who had come by to check on Oliver's weight that evening, sat on the sofa beside her, his weathered hands clutching a cup of chamomile tea. He let out a low exhale, jaw clenched with a mixture of relief and something deeper. Grief, maybe, or closure. Claire continued, her tone more serious. "Wren's in custody. So's a woman named Julia Meyer, the paper owner of the land. Turns out the Cedar Hollow property was registered under a Shell LLC she ran. They're looking at federal charges." That same night, Claire's follow-up video dropped, featuring a montage of Oliver's journey, intercut with interviews from Valerie, Tom, and footage of the rescued dogs arriving at a temporary shelter. Oliver, with his shy tail wags and tentative steps, became the unlikely symbol of resilience, a four-legged survivor with the courage to hope again. Soon after, Valerie received a letter from a small nonprofit in Denver offering to sponsor Oliver's medical needs and behavioral therapy if she agreed to let him be the face of a new campaign against cruelty in breeding facilities. She declined the offer to give him up, but agreed to share his story. "He's not your campaign," she told them. "He's my family, but if it helps others like him, I'll tell his truth." Meanwhile, Tom made his decision. One crisp morning, he and Valerie stood outside a long-abandoned storefront on the edge of town. A building with faded signage, dusty windows, and a history of disuse. "You're really reopening it?" she asked, brow arched. Tom scratched the back of his neck, face flushed. "Yeah, figured there's still work worth doing, and I'm tired of pretending I'm not that guy anymore." He gestured toward the front window. A freshly painted sign read, "Cedar Paws Animal Clinic, Dr. T. Bristow and Oliver." Valerie laughed. "You're putting his name on the door?" Tom shrugged. "He's earned it." Inside, the clinic was modest. 2 examination rooms, a front desk, and a wall already lined with photos of animals from his past practice. There was one empty frame in the center of the wall. Valerie placed a new photo inside it. Her and Oliver in the woods, sun casting long shadows behind them, his paw resting on her boot as he looked up with cautious trust. That afternoon, she returned home and found Oliver curled up on the rug in the sunlight. He was still skittish, still hesitant around visitors, but with her, he'd begun to sleep with his back exposed, an act of vulnerability she never took for granted. As she watched him nap, she thought about how far they'd come, from a mound of snow that barely breathed to a house filled with warmth and purpose, from strangers dismissed by police to the center of a movement that sparked statewide awareness, from isolation to community. He had been number 4. Now he was Oliver, and he was home. The early days of spring had begun to tease the edges of Mountain Hollow. Though patches of snow still clung stubbornly in the shade, the sun had returned to the sky with a new boldness, melting the world into a soft palette of browns, golds, and hesitant greens. Valerie stood behind the heavy velvet curtain of a modest auditorium inside the town's newly renovated civic center, the sound of rustling programs and polite conversation humming on the other side. In her lap sat Oliver, calm but alert, his fur freshly brushed and glistening under the lights. A crimson scarf was tied gently around his neck, the same one he wore in Claire's latest photo essay. He no longer trembled in crowds, not when Valerie was near. His ears remained perked, tail resting gently against her boot, and every so often his nose turned slightly to nuzzle her palm. She whispered to him now, not just for comfort, but out of habit, like any mother would to her child. "You're going to charm them all, you know that?" A volunteer with a clipboard, mid-to-40s, blonde hair streaked with silver, dressed in a simple black suit and kind demeanor, peeked around the curtain. "Miss Green, you're on in 2. Valerie stood, smoothing the front of her navy dress. Her hands were steady, though her heart had begun a quiet gallop. The room beyond was filled not with strangers, but with people who had followed Oliver's story from pixels on a screen to this moment in person. Many were members of rescue groups, local government, veterinarians, and a few familiar faces from town. At the center of the stage stood a podium draped in a white cloth, embroidered with paw prints and the words, "Voice for the Voiceless." When she stepped into the light, applause erupted. Not thunderous, but warm, insistent, honest. Oliver walked at her side with deliberate calm, his red scarf fluttering slightly as he stepped onto the stage. They stood together before the crowd, Valerie adjusting the microphone, glancing at Oliver, then back at the audience. "I'm not here today as an expert," she began. "I'm not a vet or a rescuer or a policymaker. I'm just someone who went for a walk one morning and found a heartbeat buried in the snow." She paused, allowing her words to settle like the hush of snowfall. That heartbeat had no name, no tag, no voice, just a number burned into a collar and a body too small to understand the cold that tried to take him. But he held on, and when he did, he gave me something too, a reason to hold on myself. Valerie's voice wavered only once, but Oliver pressed his side gently against her ankle, grounding her. "Today, he's not a number. He's Oliver, and he is my family." The crowd rose in a standing ovation, not just for the story, but for the reminder of what love could rebuild. After the event, Valerie and Oliver joined Claire near the press table. Claire wore a structured olive coat, her curly hair tucked behind one ear, her camera slung across her chest, as always. Her eyes were alight, not with adrenaline, but with fulfillment. She handed Valerie a printed magazine, warm from the printer. The cover bore a sepia-toned image of Oliver's paw against Valerie's hand. The headline read, "Number 4 No More, the dog who changed a town and the woman who wouldn't let go." Inside, the feature was laid out in beautiful spreads, photographs, testimony, investigative links, a timeline of the case, and a deeply personal editorial. Claire had titled it, "The Snow That Wept." Valerie flipped to the final page where Claire had written, "They found each other in a graveyard of silence, but what they built was louder than any cruelty, because sometimes all it takes is one hand in the snow, one stubborn refusal to look away, to change everything." Later that evening, Valerie drove out alone with Oliver curled in the passenger seat, his head resting on the folded edge of her coat. She turned down the road she once walked on that fateful morning, now cleared of snow, but still haunting in its quiet. She pulled over where the trees began to thin and stepped out into the clearing. There, at the very place she'd knelt months ago, now stood a small, tasteful monument. It was a smooth slab of gray stone, waist high, with a brass plaque embedded in the front. On it were engraved the words, "Where they thought there was only snow, a heart was waiting to be found." She sat down beside it, Oliver lying quietly at her feet. The sky overhead had turned a soft pink, the last rays of sun slipping through the clouds in lazy streaks. As a breeze carried the first flutters of new snow across the field, gentle and weightless, a final gift of winter, Valerie watched Oliver lift his head to chase a flake. He leapt playfully, something she had never seen him do before. His tail wagged freely, his eyes sparkled. She laughed, her chest swelling with something deeper than gratitude. The storm was over, and the sun had finally come home.